My strange uncle and his wife who looked too much like his daughter. In 2005, I visited my estranged uncle and his wife in Oregon. I was on a road trip and thought to say hi to him. I hadn't seen him for 10 years after my whole family cut him off. I remembered him with little memory and a few pictures from my childhood. I never understood why they cut him off, and my parents didn't know I had communication with him. When I visited him, it would be my first time meeting his wife. Since it was late, he suggested I stay for the night and leave in the morning. I agreed, and they had my room prepared already. Looking at their photos, I realized his wife looked very much like his daughter, my cousin, before she went missing. I found it funny in my head, but the more I looked at the photos, the more it gave me chills. I was born right after she went missing, so I knew her from memory and the pictures in their house. His wife had the same birthmark on her neck. I thought to myself, this is impossible. While preparing for dinner, she held me tight and told me to leave when he goes to Walmart and never come back. I was 18 at the time, and I remember the horror in her eyes when she told me to leave. I left and called the police to his house, hoping to save her. A few days later, I heard she was gone and that my uncle ended up in prison. My whole family knew about it the whole time. My whole family knew what he was doing to his own daughter, but they just let it happen. Finding this out was devastating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they could have stopped it. His twisted reasoning was that his daughter looked exactly like his late wife, and he couldn't bear the fact that she had passed away. I felt nothing but disappointment and anger because my cousin was just 9 at the time. I can't imagine the horror she had to go through at such a young age. Only a monster could do that, and only a heartless man. My parents told me it was either my cousin or one of us. I asked what she meant, and she said my uncle tried to kidnap one of his nieces in a desperate attempt to replace his wife. Years went by, but the nightmare lingered. My uncle's house, now abandoned, stood as a dark reminder of everything that happened. One night, I felt compelled to revisit it, hoping to find some closure. As I got closer, the air grew colder and an eerie silence took over. Inside, the house was frozen in time, with dust-covered furniture and old photos still on the walls. I wandered into the basement and found stairs, under a drilled carpet leading to a hidden room. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about missing children. My heart pounded as I realized my uncle was part of something much worse than I'd imagined. The weird thing is that the house was set to be demolished by my family. I reported everything to the police, and they told me they would investigate it since they overlooked that part during the initial investigation. My parents were notified, and they were disappointed in me for causing more trouble. They were trying to keep the situation low and didn't want to make it bigger. I started by confronting my parents. My mother broke down, admitting my uncle had always been like that. His grief turned dark after he lost his wife, and my cousin happened to look exactly like her. When my cousin went missing, they suspected him but had no proof. They cut ties with him to protect the rest of us, but never imagined the horrors he would commit. They found out that he turned her into his wife. Determined to understand my uncle's full depravity, I started investigating his past. I dug up police reports, old newspaper articles, and talked to his former neighbors. The stories were chilling. He was a master manipulator, charming on the outside but hiding sinister intentions. He preyed on vulnerable people, twisting their trust into something dark. One encounter stood out. I tracked down a retired detective who had worked on my cousin's case. He shared disturbing insights, revealing my uncle was a prime suspect in several unsolved disappearances. The evidence was circumstantial, but the pattern was clear. Young girls, all with similar looks to his wife, vanished without a trace. The detective had long suspected my uncle but couldn't prove it. My investigation led me back to my uncle's house, still abandoned due to people fearing living in that house with its disgusting history. I returned with a friend for support. We searched the basement, looking for anything the police might have missed. They cleared out the room under the basement, but again, we found a hidden compartment with old videotapes. My heart sank as we played them. They documented my uncle's twisted doings and unspeakable horrors. Among them was my cousin, her fear and pain captured in excruciating detail. We gave the tapes to the police, who reopened the investigation. The new evidence was enough to convict my uncle of multiple murders, ensuring he'd never be free again. But the damage was done. The tapes haunted me, a stark reminder of the evil so close to home. He was once again put on trial for life in prison. In the aftermath, my family fell apart. My parents abandoned me and fled the country, unable to face the consequences of their silence. The revelations forced us to confront our collective failure, and guilt consumed what little remained of our once close family. The weight of our shared history became unbearable. I buried myself in work, desperate to escape the memories, but the darkness left an indelible mark on my soul. Nightmares plagued me, and distrust seeped into every relationship. I was always looking over my shoulder, haunted by the fear that my uncle's legacy might somehow persist. Years passed, and I slowly began to rebuild my life. Therapy became my refuge, a space where I tried to untangle the web of trauma. Volunteering at a shelter for abused children gave me a sense of purpose. It was my way of honoring my cousin and the other victims, ensuring their suffering wouldn't be forgotten. But just when I thought I had started to understand my past, another horrific truth emerged. At 35, I learned something that shattered the fragile stability I had worked so hard to build. My mother, too, had been a victim of my uncle's dark world. The revelation didn't stop there. She confided in me one evening, her voice trembling with pain, that I was the product of that darkness. My father, the man I once trusted, had been a close friend of my uncle and an active participant in his twisted crimes. The worst part was that only my uncle had been held accountable, as the atrocities had taken place under his roof. My father walked away unscathed, his sins buried until now. This truth unraveled me. The man who was supposed to protect me was a monster in disguise. The childhood memories I had cherished suddenly felt like illusions, tainted by the shadow of horrors I hadn't understood. When I confronted my mother, hoping for clarity, she broke down. Her pain and guilt were palpable. She revealed that she had been coerced into marrying my father, forced by my grandparents to avoid the stigma of being a single mother. She had lived in constant fear, trapped in a cycle of trauma and silence. My uncle had threatened her into submission, and she had no escape. Her confession left me in pieces. I couldn't fathom the depth of her suffering, nor could I reconcile it with my own grief. I told her I didn't blame her, but the weight of her guilt was too much. A few months later, she took her own life. Her suicide followed shortly after my father divorced her, unable to bear the fallout of her revelations. She had told me everything, every haunting detail she had buried for decades, and it consumed her. I wished I had never been born into this family. I wished my mother had found peace in life, but perhaps she has now, in death.